acorn. See this acorn? What is this stupid thing? It's nothing. It's an acorn. What's that? It would have no meaning. Only if you know the acorn becomes a tree does the acorn have meaning, right? By itself, if I just gave you an acorn, nothing on earth would let you figure out what that thing was. Once you see it becomes a tree, aha, an acorn is the seed or whatever it is for a tree. So what we're doing here is we're planting some acorns. And it's therefore necessarily a little bit awkward for you. You can't quite see the purpose of it. But we're going to do these acorns first, and then we build the tree. So don't freak out if you can't quite get, all what's going on. Okay, so Marshall defines economics like this. There's a reason for me telling you this. The study of mankind in the ordinary business of life, it examines that part of individual and social action which is most closely connected with the attainment and with the use of the material requisites of well-being. Now that is a broad definition. As such, it's not our more recent definition, but it's a definition that would cover economics for any type of society, right? But also in some ways it's not that informative. What does that tell us? The modern definition, the one usually used in the modern textbook, is this one. Economics is the study of how society chooses to allocate its relatively limited resources among the unlimited wants of its members. Now this definition is really interesting because first of all, it hits all the buzzwords of economics. Choice, allocate, limited resources, unlimited wants, right? All those things. Basically it says society has, we have limited resources and we have unlimited wants. And what economics is the science of figuring how we take limited resources and satisfy as many wants as we can, given that our wants are limited and unlimited. Right, everybody? Now this economics, and the economics we're going to learn, one part of it is this, now I don't buy this for a minute, is that it says it's positivist. It claims that it is not biased in any way, shape, or form. It has no prejudices. It simply looks at the world. The fact that most of it's done by like old white men is denied that this means anything, right? It's, of European men. This means nothing. It is universally applicable because we simply observe it. But actually, in that definition, there's already an issue, and that is the issue of unlimited wants. Aristotle, for example, says human beings don't have unlimited wants. You want to go to the bar with me tonight? Now, I myself don't drink, but let's say we go there. Let's say you love chocolate. Let's have chocolate. How much chocolate can you eat? Do you have unlimited wants in chocolate? No way. Do you have unlimited wants for any food? I love this. I remember when I was young, there was these little girls who lived next door, and there was a song then by Helen Reddy called I Am Woman. Maybe you know it. If you don't, you're lucky. If you do, you're not so lucky. It is a worm. Those little girls, they were 10 years old. We had a porch, and they played on our porch, and they played this song for 5 hours. And I am a wonderful person because I did not shoot them. I let them do it, and it drove us crazy. I mean, we were university students who just wanted to party, and were probably hungover, and these little creatures were playing this insane song. But they never got tired of it. But any other human being would get tired of it, right? Name their favorite song. I'll play it for you for 4 hours, and you'll never want to hear it again, right? So, are wants unlimited? Aristotle says no. In fact, Aristotle says, really interestingly, a virtuous person is only this, someone who doesn't have too much. You're not virtuous because you're on a diet. That isn't what's required. All that's required is when you eat or you do anything, you have as much as you like and no more. Non-virtue is having too much, like the Paris Hilton type, Lindsay Lohan, whoever the latest one is, type where you get drunk and you get sick and that kind of thing. Too much. You don't have to do that. That's not good. You don't like it. It's not fun, right? Most of you learn, if you haven't, got into some kind of party where you got sick, you'll do it once and you'll learn you don't want to do it again, right? So what is this stuff about unlimited wants? So there's a whole other economics that says, actually human beings don't have unlimited wants. This is insane to think they have unlimited wants. You think, well, I have to have a new iPad, I have to have this kind of new thing, my camera needs to be able to take me to the moon and so on and so forth. But no. Actually, this might be totally artificial. But the reason for that assumption is that if you don't have unlimited wants, then you don't have limited resources, right? There might be enough resources for everything we need. You know, everything we need. But creating a whole bunch of things we don't need, there isn't enough resources. So I just say to you, it's an interesting definition, but that definition is the product of an economics that claims that it has no bias, no assumptions that are not perfectly true. And it's not perfectly true, perfectly provable that people have unlimited wants. So I just point this out to you as we begin. Then, so I've explained a lot of that. Secondly, economic theory begins with clear definitions and simplifying assumptions, and then proceeds by logic to conclusions. Now, as I said, you know, basically the logic, once you get the definitions and start moving, logically, the logic is pretty well unassailable, usually. The definitions are the weakness, if there's any. So just be aware of that. We're not in this course interested in a criticism, we're interested in learning. Even if I thought it was wrong, the most important thing for you to do is to learn what the standard is, and when we learn it. Now, there's a distinction there. Aura mentions the term positivism is an economics that says, look, we just look at the world. This is the way the world is. There's a person who's unemployed there. I observe it. I don't make any value judgments, whether they ought to be unemployed or whether I ought to care about them being unemployed. I just observe they're unemployed and I try to understand that world. But there's another world which is called normative, which says, you know, we need to worry about that. People ought not to be unemployed, right? So this economics you're learning basically says, don't worry about that. Don't worry about it. Just, this economics claims to be completely dispassionate, just reinforce that. It's not. But it claims to be, right? At the beginning, that's all we need to know. Okay, so for myself, there's a real weakness there, but no matter, we move on. Okay, and I just say, we'll leave that. So let's get down to this. But read my notes, because I add a little bit more that I may not feel at a moment of going through. Okay, resources. Definition, commodities. What is a commodity? It is a good or a service that's basically exchanged in the marketplace. That's what a commodity is. If you cut your own grass and you put that grass in a salad, that's not a commodity. If you sell that grass to somebody as, you know, compost or something, that is a commodity. Number one, it has to be a market. It's usually, I can tell like around 1870, people usually thought of commodities as physical goods, but they're also services. Doctor services, lawyer services, etc. Okay? So usually we should always say goods and services, but if I just say goods, I'm just using shorthand. Definition, resources, what are they? They are the inputs used in the production of goods and services. So, we have basically a world full of resources. We're going to call it labor, capital, land. And we use those resources, we put those things together in various ways. In the market economy, firms do that. They put that together, and they produce other goods which they sell into the market. Right, everybody? And those are the goods we're primarily interested in. Most of us are consumers. We don't own factories. We're not hiring workers. We're not buying machines. We're consumers. That's the end product. But the resources need to be transformed into those goods. They can also be transformed into other machines. Right? Okay, so that's what resources are. Now, classical economics, which is about 1770 to 1870, that period there. And I don't refer to these periods because they're kind of interesting to get a sense of what was going on. They divided resources into three categories. Land, capital, and labor. Now those are the classics. Modern economics has added a fourth one, entrepreneurship. Sometimes maybe called technology or something like that. But entrepreneurship will be fine. In this class, we're going to basically just talk about capital and labor. Everybody? And what is labor, first of all? Labor is fairly straightforward. I wouldn't even worry too much about the definition. It's simply human activity, mental or physical, directed to the production of something for sale. Right? Labor. But again, if you cut your own grass, not labor, because you're not selling it. If somebody cuts the grass for you, that labor you're buying. Okay? And that's labor. If you take care of your own kids, not labor. If you take care of someone else's kids as a babysitter, labor. So there's, the labor part's easy to understand, but to recognize that we're discussing market economics, not economics in general. And we talk about only things that result in market, exchange. Okay, then let's talk next about land. Land is basically, there's many definitions of it. What it is usually defined as a natural resource, that is, a resource that hasn't been altered by people in some way or shape or form. So land, when we look at it, well, here's the farm, I look at the land of the farm, I say, hey, there's the land, those trees. But in Ontario, people have been farming for 100 years. The land is not virgin forest. That land probably has almost 100 years of fertilizer, one form or another. Every one of those trees could very possibly be grown by a person. So in one sense, it's not a natural resource anymore. Don't worry about it, right? It might even be, remember, say this is literally capital. It's capital because all the ground there was produced by people in the form of fertilizer, and every one of those trees was grown by a person. Right? So, but in general, we just say land is natural resources. We're not going to worry about it. Okay? Not a big deal. Capital. This is the biggie. We need to know this. Capital, we'll talk about various times in the course, but it's simply those inputs in production that are not natural resources and they're not labor. They're produced. Capital is somewhere in the past produced by people. So it would be raw materials, could be cotton, not like, even like any type of cotton cloth. Even raw cotton is produced and picked and sent to market. Wool is taken off the sheep. So these things are raw materials. They're essentially capital, right? They're produced by people. And fuel and all the rest. But also including this, machines and equipment. Any kind of instruments, shovels, wheelbarrows, back-end loaders, trucks, factory buildings. All these things are capital. Everybody? Capital. It's basically something that was produced by humans and is now used to facilitate production by other humans. Right? So if I want to produce steel, I need to have a building to house my blast furnace. I need a blast furnace. I need a lot of iron, some kind of, I need ore, whatever it is. I need fuel to heat the blast furnace. All these kind of things, and of course I need labor. All right? Capital. All right, so these are the things we have. And now, each of these things, as traditionally, they each have an income. What's the income of labor? Wages. What is the income of land? What was that? Rent. Land is rent. Now that's the first thing. You would think. Now interestingly, this is like baby steps. So take these baby steps, and you can, later I'm going to come right at you and say, tell me now. Tell me something. Be logical. And all you need to do is take these baby steps. Boom, boom, boom. No problem. Okay? You'll see what I mean. So this is capital. Land is that. Land gives a rent. Capital gives a profit, right, in the traditional sense. There's also another category called interest. The classical economists restricted interest to basically interest on money. In modern economics, the return on capital is actually called interest. And profit is the return to the entrepreneur, the person who organizes everything. But for us, I want you to remember capital and labor, wages and profit. Okay, everybody? Profit is the return to capital. Why does capital get a profit? That's an important issue. Oh, guess what? We'll do that in the first year. Doesn't matter how important it is, we don't do it. We'll discuss other things. All right, so that's capital. Remember that. Because I'm going to ask you a phenomenally simple question pretty soon. I want you to write down the answer. And I told you the answer because I told you the definitions and I told you the logic. Okay? Now, another thing about capital to remember is this. Capital is physical. Can I scream this in these rooftops? Capital is physical. This is capital. The floor is capital. This is capital. Equipment is capital. Who's using a computer? He's using a computer. Is his computer capital? Yes or no, in the strict sense of the word?
Yes.
Oh, does it generate a profit for him? Does it? Are you generating a profit for him? No. Now, it turns out, does he produce something that he sells with his capital? Does he? No. His computer is not capital. He doesn't produce anything to sell, and he doesn't make a profit, so it's not capital, right? Again, you could come in here and you could cut, you can be the most amazing student whoever was, or like, writer whoever was, but if you don't sell your writing, so far as we're concerned, you're not laboring. Yes? No, this again, you are selling it. You're sitting in it, right? You're paying for this. And could you take this class, you're paying for it, and I need a desk for a seat, right? This seat is absolutely necessary for you to be able to take this class. Therefore, it's capital, right? That's why it's capital. So number one, capital labor must produce something that is sold. Labor will generate a wage, capital will generate profit. For our purposes, we don't have to worry about the rest of the stuff. And these things are capital because they're part of a process that is sold to you. You pay for it, right? Yes.
So the computer in the university often employs capital?
Yeah. In this room, my computer is capital because in a sense I'm selling stuff to you. The clock is capital because it's neat. But everything that's part of the University of Toronto's provision of education to you, which you're paying for, is capital, right? I'm laboring, right? But if if you're not selling, it's not part of the process of producing something that is sold, it's not capital. It's just a cost. So a car can be a car that you're using, but if you're using it for your summer job of cutting lawns, it's capital. Right, everybody? Important distinction. But another reason, capital is physical. Look at this room. The capital in this room is what's in this room. This room could very well have a mortgage on it. No. University built this room, maybe the room cost them $1 million. They built the room and they have $1 million mortgage. A mortgage is nothing but a legal instrument of ownership, right? It's a debt. It is not capital. All the debts on earth I could pile up right here in a huge pile, and guess what they would produce? Zip. They can't produce anything. All the mortgages on earth cannot provide housing. They're just financial instruments. Paper money, for example, is not capital. Gold is capital, as it turns out, because it itself is a commodity. But paper money is not capital. So this is fundamental. Capital is physical. And you can make like a bond, for example. Very often say, I'll ask you this question. My grandmother gave me $5,000. I took that $5,000 and I invested in a bond, a government bond, that I purchased for $5,000, and it pays me 5% interest, $50 a year. I invested in the bond, okay? Good. Now I'm going to come back to you and ask you if I used the term correctly. All right, so capital is physical, number one. Now the investment, what is investment? Investment is the change in capital, the change in capital. So what is the investment this year in this room? Well, I think people can tell that almost the whole part of this room, there's no new capital. Now these packages are invested in the sense that I invested in them because it's really produced capital, and they sold them to you, right? Capital is also inventory, by the way, I'm sold. But maybe some of the light bulbs were produced this year, that would be investment this year. If one of the chairs broke this year and was replaced, that would be investment. If I had a new computer, that would be investment. Investment is the change in capital. Everybody? And when we use change, just so we start, change is a very important idea in economics. We'll get to it. I use the delta form for change. So that means any kind of change. Like it could be a change of 1 unit, 50 units, an infinitesimal change in units. Okay, everybody? This one, which I sometimes use, because it's easier for me when I'm using my computer. Oftentimes I'll just, rather than write on the board, this would be comfortable to write on the board, but sometimes in a larger class I won't. I'll use this D. D is the calculus form of change. But I sometimes will just use it for change in general, because that delta is hard to do in a word program, right? But it's not hard to do, it just takes a second. But a second I don't really want. The difference between the change and the D, strictly speaking, is calculus deals with infinitesimal change. We deal with all kinds of change, all right, everybody? Now, it turns out, just by the way, there's no calculus in this course, but I can flat out tell you, if I didn't have other things to deal with, I would stop right now and say, in 15 minutes, I'm going to teach everybody in this course all the calculus you need to do second year calculus. But to do what we want to do to calculus in this course, it's called like simple derivatives of power functions. It is simpler than most of the stuff you would know, even if you know nothing about mathematics. And you'd be amazed how simple it is. But we're not going to do it. Right? I remember trying to help my son with his grade 6 something or other, like we had to do a triangle, I forget, find that squaring the triangle, some stupid thing, where it takes like a whole hour because you can't use calculus. If you use calculus, it takes 30 seconds at most, 10 seconds. So the calculus is actually almost like 1, 2, 3, the basics of it. But we're not going to use it, so don't worry. That D, I will only use to mean change in general, not a calculus change. All right? Okay, so capital stock is all the capital we say in this room. Investment gross is the change in investment. I say here the newly added investment, the newly produced capital, right? So investment is the change in capital. What is the investment in capital this year means? What is the change in capital this year? How many more machines, raw material, and inventory did we add? That's investment, okay? Questions coming, wait for it. Depreciation is the physical, that's just the flat out breakdown, or the technological depletion of capital. So in this room, maybe there's 150 chairs. Depreciation is a chair breaks, right? Technological obsolescence or depreciation of a computer is, I mean, you're sure all of you, we have all sorts of computers at home. They work perfectly, but of course they don't connect to Wi-Fi or they don't connect to the internet or some stupid thing because they're 10 years old. They're perfectly fine, but they're technologically obsolete. They're depreciated. I gotta write them off, right? I can't use them. So that's depreciation. Depreciation. Now, a net investment is the difference between gross investment and depreciation. Right? Net investment. Okay, very simple. There's 150 chairs in this room. That is gross investment. Everybody? I'm sorry. That is the capital stock. Suppose this year 5 chairs break. That is depreciation. Okay then, suppose this year the university brings 10 chairs into the room. That is gross investment. All right? What is net investment? 5. What is the capital stock at the end of the year? Well, how many chairs in the room at the end of the year? 155, right? So the net investment is relevant to the actual change in the operating capital. So I think, say, if U of T produced 10 chairs and there was 20 chairs broken, like this year we can have 150 students. 20 chairs break, U of T replaces 10 chairs. Even though there's 10 new chairs produced, the capital stock is now only 140 because 20 chairs broke and we only added 10. Net investment is minus 10. Our capital stock is 140, therefore we can only have 140 students. So net investment is really more relevant than gross investment. Everybody? Gross investment tells us the new capital produced, but net investment tells us how the capital stock changes. All right? Okay, everybody, write this down. What was wrong with my story about the grandmother who gave me $5,000, or was it like $1,000, and I invested it in a bond, and I got $60 a year from purchase of that bond? What was wrong with that statement? Write it down. What did I say that was wrong there? How many of you have the answer? Wait a minute, you all have the answer, don't you? How many people have the answer? The only one with the answer? Do you have the answer? You have an
I'm
answer.
not sure, I was just questioning the percentage you were saying. If
Okay, yeah, forget the percentage, you're right, I might didn't remember whether I was doing what percent or whatever, yeah, you're right. Forget the percent, that would be wrong. What did I say, 5%, $50? Well, that would be the correct percent, I'm not sure whether I used 1,000. What was wrong with my statement, or what we just learned today? How many of you can give me an answer? Hands up, come on, don't be afraid. 1, 2, 2 of you? Now notice, everybody, I'm not being critical, I'm just saying to you this. Would you not say that what I just told you sounded pretty simple? It was simple, wasn't it? But then when I ask you something about it, you don't understand. This is difficult. You never learn by absorption. Never. I'm actually pretty, I got to university because I have a phenomenal memory, at least I did once, and I know how to study. When the exam came, I would study, but before the exam,